Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going all in on Amor Towles, A Gentleman in Moscow. This novel is full of history and resilience and even some mouth-watering descriptions of food.
Oh, yeah. The food.
Oh, we'll definitely get to that, don't you worry.
Yeah.
Our source material here, by the way, takes us across decades, all within the walls of Moscow's Metropol Hotel.
The Metropol, it almost becomes its own character in the book, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Towles uses this really confined setting to explore these surprisingly vast themes. Like right away we're introduced to Count Alexander Rostov, an aristocrat who's sentenced to house arrest back in 1922. So imagine that, like your whole life just gets upended, your freedom totally revoked. But the story, it doesn't dwell on what the Count loses, but it focuses more on what he discovers within these new limitations.
And I think that's what's so compelling about the way Tal sets this all up. We start with the Count in this, like, super extravagant suite. I'm picturing 8-foot windows overlooking Theater Square, just pure luxury. But then out of nowhere, he's forced to relocate to a cramped little attic room.
Quite a fall from grace, isn't it? But what I find remarkable is how the Count handles it all. He doesn't just, like, give in to despair or anything. Instead, he gets practical. Like, he carefully selects just a few belongings to take with him, his grandmother's opera glasses, his sister Helena's portrait, and by doing that, he kind of creates this sense of order and meaning in this new, really confined space.
You know, I was reading that part, and it made me think about times I've had to, like, downsize or let go of, well, stuff, you know.
Yeah.
It's never fun, but there is something empowering about making those choices.
About being intentional about what you keep, what truly has value.
Right, exactly. And the Count's resourcefulness reminded me of Robinson Crusoe, you know, stranded on that island.
I see the connection. Adapting to a new environment. Mastering it, almost. There's this one line in the book that really resonated with me. Having dispensed with dreams of quick discovery, the world's Crusoes seek shelter and a source of fresh water. They teach themselves to make fire from flint. Like, isn't that just a perfect little guidebook for resilience?
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of finding your way in unexpected situations, we meet Nina in the story, right? This super curious young girl who basically becomes the Count's guide to all the hidden parts of the Metropol.
Nina, she's such a breath of fresh air. She really challenges the Count's worldview, offers him a fresh perspective. Do you remember the part where she's learning about, like, princess etiquette?
Oh, yeah. She just couldn't understand why a princess would ever need to say please or thank you.
Right. Because, like, why wouldn't everyone already do whatever she says?
Classic Nina. She really forces the Count to see things in a new way. And then there's the Count himself. He becomes this incredible observer, not just of, like, the hotel and its architecture, but also of, like, human behavior. I'm thinking of those waiters in the Piazza restaurant.
Those guys. Yes, I found them fascinating. They're so efficient. It's almost, I don't know, brusque. What did you make of them?
I definitely got the sense that Towles was using those waiters to say something about the changing social landscape. That shift towards, like, pure practicality, even if it means sacrificing warmth or personal connection.
But there's a cost to progress.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. And that theme of societal change, it becomes even more prominent in the Boyarsky, which is the hotel's legendary wine cellar, right?
I love that scene.
Yeah, so the Count goes down into this famous cellar, expecting to find this vast selection, you know, like it used to be. And what does he discover? Just red or white wine, all at the same price. Right. It just completely shatters this illusion of gradual decline. And it's that moment where he realizes that an era can vanish in, like, an instant. It's a really powerful scene.
It is. It makes you think about how we often view change in our own lives. You know, we think things will just fade away slowly, but then sometimes, boom, things are just irrevocably different. And right around this time in the book, we meet Anna.
Yeah.
Yes, Anna. This once famous actress whose star is fading. It's almost like she and the Count are mirroring each other in a way. Each of them grappling with loss and a shifting world.
They've joined the Confederacy of the Humbled, as Towles puts it.
What a phrase.
Right. But even within that shared humbling, there's also this sense of camaraderie between the Count and Anna.
They find comfort in knowing they're not alone in their struggles.
And just when their world seems to have shrunk down to the size of the Metropol, we meet Sophia.
Ah, Sophia. She's that burst of sunshine the story needs.
She really is. I mean, she brings this unexpected joy to the Count's life. It's just impossible not to smile when she's on the page.
Yeah, she's a reminder that life can still surprise us, even when things seem pretty bleak. And the Metropol itself, you know, with its ever-changing guests and its stories, it starts to feel like this microcosm of the outside world, reflecting all the complexities and the unexpected twists and turns.
Absolutely. And just as we're settling into this sense of, I don't know, maybe normalcy, we have the return of Mishka.
The Count's old friend.
Right, but it's not the happy reunion you might expect. Mishka comes back bearing the weight of his experiences in Soviet labor camps.
It's a harsh reminder of the darkness that exists outside the hotel walls.
It really is. And speaking of darkness and hardship, there's that passage where the Count is reading Shalamov's Klima tales that always sticks with me.
Oh, yes. The one about the bread.
Exactly. Shalamov writes about how incredible the bread is in Berlin. He says that people who haven't been abroad have no idea how good bread can actually be. It's such a simple observation, but coming from someone who's experienced the horrors of the Gulag, it's just incredibly powerful.
It really highlights the contrast between the abundance of the West and the scarcity of Soviet Russia at the time. And it's ironic, isn't it, that the Soviet authorities actually censored that very passage.
They were afraid it would spark discontent.
Right. But what it really does is showcase the resilience of the human spirit. It shows us that even in the darkest of times, we can find joy in the simplest things.
It's a reminder to appreciate the little things, the everyday things we often take for granted. And it makes me think about the way Towles uses food throughout the novel to illustrate the changing times in Russia.
Oh, the food. Those descriptions. They're so vivid, I swear you can almost taste the dishes he describes. Like, remember how the Boyarsky's menu changes over time?
It starts out so extravagant, full of choices.
Right, reflecting that pre-revolution abundance.
But then, gradually, the options start disappearing.
Mirroring the increasing scarcity and control of the new regime.
And it's not just what's being served, but it's also how people are eating. Like, early in the book, you have these lavish banquets.
Multi-course meals, specialized serving utensils.
Like that asparagus server.
Yes, the asparagus server. It becomes a symbol of a bygone era, a time of leisure and refined manners. And as time goes on, those meals, they become much simpler, more functional.
Just like everything else, it's like you can taste the changing times in the food itself.
Absolutely. And we see the same kind of shift in clothing too, right? He starts out in these elegant suits, starched collars, just the peak of aristocratic fashion.
But then he gradually starts to adopt simpler, more functional clothing.
It reflects his own internal transformation. He's letting go of the trappings of his old life.
And embracing a more practical approach to, well, everything.
Exactly. And it's not just him. Anna's style evolves too.
From glamorous gowns to simpler dresses.
It's a subtle but powerful way to show how these external changes reflect the characters' inner journeys, their adaptation to a new world.
I totally agree. It's like their clothing becomes a visual representation of their evolving identities. And speaking of evolving identities, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the way Towles uses ghosts and apparitions throughout the novel.
Ah, yes. The ghosts. They're more than just spooky figures haunting the halls of the Metropol. They represent the past, the memories, the regrets that linger in the minds of the characters.
Like when the Count is feeling lost and alone, he compares himself to Hamlet's father.
Roaming the ramparts of Elsinore, weighed down by his untimely death.
Right, and he even compares himself to Akaki Akakiyevich from Gogol's The Overcoat.
Poor Akaki, forever searching for his stolen coat.
Do you think Towles is suggesting that the Count is also in danger of being consumed by what he's lost?
Possibly, but I think it's more about the Count struggling with a sense of displacement. He's lost his place in the world, his purpose. And he's looking for a new way to define himself, just like those literary ghosts who inhabit the books he reads.
It's like he's haunted by the past, but he's also trying to learn from it to find a way to move forward. And then there's that scene with the ghost of the one-eyed cat.
Ah, yes. A bit humorous, a bit poignant.
It is. I mean, the cat was such a fixture in the hotel, almost like a symbol of its spirit.
And even though the cat is gone, its ghost lingers.
It's almost like it's watching over the Count.
Offering a subtle form of guidance, maybe?
Oh.
Or perhaps it's just a reminder that in a world of constant change, some things endure. Some spirits refuse to be extinguished.
It's a beautiful image, full of melancholy and hope. And speaking of hope, even with all the political turmoil and personal loss, the novel is also full of these moments of unexpected joy and connection.
Absolutely. The relationships that blossom within the walls of the Metropol, between the Count and Nia, the Count and Anna, and most importantly, the bond that forms between the Count and Sophia. They all become these beacons of strength and resilience.
They really highlight the power of human connection.
They do. Those shared meals, the simple acts of kindness, the quiet conversations, they offer comfort and solace amidst the chaos.
It's a reminder that even in a world that feels increasingly constricted, there's always room for love, for laughter, for those moments of grace that make life worth living.
Yeah, it really does. And it makes me think about how Towles uses something like clothing to show those deeper changes in the characters.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, you can almost see their inner journeys just by looking at how they dress.
Exactly. We see the Count, going from those perfectly tailored suits from his, fancy past to simpler, more practical clothing.
It's a reflection of how his whole outlook on life is changing, right? He's embracing a simpler way of being.
Definitely. And Anna's wardrobe changes too, doesn't it? She goes from glamorous gowns to those more, everyday dresses as she's dealing with her new reality.
It's like they're shedding more than just their old clothes.
That's a good way to put it. They're shedding those old ideas about who they are and what their lives should be. Which makes me wonder, have you ever felt like you needed to let go of an old version of yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I think we all go through those times of, shedding and growth.
It's part of being human, I guess.
Yeah.
And A Gentleman in Moscow really captures that beautifully. It shows us that, growth can happen even when things are tough, even when you're facing loss.
And speaking of unexpected things, there's that whole element of ghosts and apparitions that runs through the novel.
Yeah, the ghosts. They aren't just there to be spooky. They represent something deeper, like the weight of the past on the characters.
I'm thinking of that part where the Count compares himself to Hamlet's father, pacing those castle walls.
Haunted by his death.
Exactly. And he even compares himself to that character from Gogol's The Overcoat, Akaki Akakiyevich.
Poor Akaki, so fixated on that stolen coat.
Do you think Towles is trying to say that the Count is, in danger of being too focused on what he's lost?
Maybe. But I think it's more that he's grappling with this feeling of being lost himself. Like he's lost his place in the world, his purpose, and he's looking for a new way to define himself.
And then there's that scene with the ghost of the one-eyed cat.
Oh, yeah. That one's both funny and kind of sad.
It is. That cat was, such a part of the hotel.
And even though it's gone, its ghost is still there.
It's like it's looking out for the Count.
Yeah, maybe offering some guidance. Or maybe it's just showing that even in a world where things are constantly changing, some things stick around.
It's an interesting image, for sure. And speaking of things that stick around, even with all the turmoil and loss in the novel, there are these moments of real joy and connection.
Absolutely. Those relationships that the Count forms in the Metropol, with Nina, with Anna, and especially with Sophia, they give him strength.
It's like they show that human connection can be so powerful.
You really can. All those little moments, sharing meals, small acts of kindness, just talking to each other, those things make a difference.
It's a good reminder that even when things feel really limited, there's still room for good things to happen. For love and laughter and just those moments that make life worth living.
And as we get to the end of the book, the stakes get higher with Sophia's decision to escape to Paris. It's a risky move for both her and the Count.
It's so tense. Towles really knows how to build suspense in those last few chapters.
He does. What did you think about how he describes the escape plan? The stolen passport, that map of Paris.
Oh, it had me on the edge of my seat. You can really feel how desperate the Count is to get Sophia to safety.
And then there's that final confrontation with the bishop.
Intense.
Right. It's like all those years of frustration just boil over.
The Count is finally taking a stand, even though he knows it could have terrible consequences.
And in a way, his risk pays off. Sophia escapes, and the Count is finally free to leave the Metropol. It's victory, but there's some sadness there too.
Yeah, it's definitely bittersweet. He's leaving behind the life he built, but he's also free to start over.
And as the book ends, we're left wondering what he'll do with that freedom, what his future holds.
It's an ending full of possibility, that's for sure. And speaking of possibility, I loved how Towles weaves in all those literary references throughout the novel. It's like he's created this whole tapestry of Russian literature.
I totally agree. You've got Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Chekhov, Gogol. Their ideas are all woven into the story.
There's that one line from Tolstoy's Anna Karenina that really stayed with me. Do you see these stones in this bare, scorching desert? Turn them into bread, and mankind will run after you like sheep, grateful and obedient. But you did not want to deprive man of freedom, and rejected the offer. For what sort of freedom is it, you reasoned, if obedience is bought with loaves of bread?
Wow, what a quote.
Right. It makes you think about the choices we make and what we're willing to sacrifice for freedom. And those ideas really hit home when you think about the historical context.
Especially in that scene where the Count is reading Shalamov's Kalima Tales.
Oh, yeah, the one about the bread in Berlin.
That one. It's such a simple observation, but
Yeah.
so powerful, coming from someone who's been through the gulag.
It really shows the difference between the abundance of the West and what life was like in Soviet Russia. And it's ironic that the Soviet authorities tried to censor that passage.
They were afraid it would make people unhappy, but really, it shows how resilient people can be.
It's a reminder that even when things are really tough, we can still find joy. And speaking of resilience, what did you think of the ending, with the Count walking out of the Metropol? It's hopeful, but we don't really know what will happen next.
It shows how much he's changed. He's gone through so much confinement, loss, upheaval, and he's come out of it as this incredibly resilient and compassionate person. He really is a gentleman.
And that last scene, with Sophia arriving in Paris and starting her new life, it's just so moving.
It's like a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in dark times, things can get better.
It's a beautiful way to end a story that's full of surprises and emotion.
Yeah.
It makes you think about what's really important in life.
It really does. A gentleman in Moscow asked us, what would we hold on to if our lives were turned upside down? What makes us who we are? What gives us strength? Makes you think, doesn't it? And you know what else got me thinking? There's this part where the chimp is reading Shalamov's Kalima Tales.
Oh, yeah.
That bit about the bread in Berlin.
Where Shalamov says people who haven't been abroad just don't get how good bread can be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Such a simple thing, right? But coming from a guy who survived the gulag, man, it hits hard.
It really makes you realize how different things were in the West compared to Soviet Russia.
Totally. And the irony is the Soviets tried to censor that very passage.
I'm afraid it'd make people restless.
Right. But if anything, it just proves how resilient humans are.
That even when things are awful, we can still find a little bit of joy.
Exactly. So thinking about that resilience, what did you think of the ending? The Count finally walks out of the Metropol.
Oh, it was so many things at once. Relief, sadness, excitement. Like, he's free, but leaving behind everything he knows.
A real mix of emotions. Towles doesn't spell out what happens next for the Count, does he?
Not really, but you get the sense that he's in control of his own fate now.
No longer trapped.
Right. And Sophia ending up in Paris, starting fresh. It's beautiful.
A real testament to hope. No matter how bad things get, there's always that chance for a better future.
It's a perfect ending to a story that's just so full of surprises, you know? Makes you think about what's truly important, what we'd hold on to if everything changed.
Does, doesn't it? A Gentleman in Moscow really forces you to ask yourself, what defines me? What would I fight for? What gives me strength?
Big questions. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into A Gentleman in Moscow.
My pleasure. It's been great.
And to our listeners, we hope this has got you thinking too. What would you cling to if your world was turned upside down? Until next time, keep exploring those stories that remind us just how strong the human spirit can be.